Mr. Gorbachev tells the Communist Party, "I'm right, my critics talk rubbish." Can this really be enough to stop the party falling apart? Good evening from Moscow, where today the President of the Soviet Union came to praise the Communist Party in the hope that he wouldn't later have to bury it. It was the same old story, that there was no alternative to perestroika. They'd heard it all before, and few of the delegates seemed raised to new heights of enthusiasm. Can the party now avoid a split? The Deputy Prime Minister of the Soviet Union talks exclusively about his plans to create a market economy here. And what's the truth about the father of the revolution? Visionary or terrorist? We talk, among others, to the man who spent 15 years analyzing his brain.
Also tonight, Imelda Marcos, once First Lady of the Philippines, is acquitted of racketeering and fraud by a New York court, in what's seen as an embarrassment to the US government, who had taken the unusual step of prosecuting the widow of a former ally. The jury accepted the defense case that Mrs. Marcos was not just a world-class shopper, but a world-class decent human being as well. And under the peaceful surface of Anglicanism is a revolution brewing. Anthony Howard reports on the growing power of the evangelical movement, the church militant determined that their man should be the next Archbishop of Canterbury.
For 2 hours and 20 minutes here today, Mikhail Gorbachev trod water, watched by 5,000 delegates and most of the rest of the world. In opening the 28th Communist Party Congress, no one was more aware than he that the organization which has propelled him to the leadership of a superpower could fall apart. The issue here is really terribly simple. It's about power and who wields it. For 70 years, the Communist Party has been not just the party of government, but the very embodiment of the Soviet state. Mr. Gorbachev's challenge was to try to find a new role for the party, given that he's legalized other parties and, with the Soviet parliament, increasingly flexing its muscles. Radicals in the Communist Party say he's not gone nearly far enough, traditionalists that he's already gone much too far. How to satisfy both groups? Well, he tried to do it by restating the virtues of perestroika, warning that dark days were ahead if perestroika was abandoned, and saying his critics were just talking rubbish. Within 10 minutes of Mr. Gorbachev taking charge, there was a call from the floor for the entire Central Committee to resign. He managed to palm that to one side, but within the hour another radical was on his feet.
Я предлагаю либо внести отдельным пунктом, либо рассмотреть в рамках пункта 1 повестки дня вопрос о политической ответственности КПСС перед народом.
This proposal went to a vote, to be rejected by a margin of over 2,000, a clear indication of the thumping majority enjoyed by conservatives. For the first couple of hours, all this was seen live on Soviet television. Then Mr. Gorbachev proposed that the rest be screened in edited highlights tonight. This decidedly limited approach to glasnost was, it was rumored, to prevent people becoming so excited by the sea of grey suits that they stopped work.
И что надо создать пресс-группу, которая бы контролировала телепередачи со съезда.
The reason for Mr. Gorbachev's apprehension became clear after lunch. In a remarkable admission for a communist leader, he publicly accepted what many have known for years. The party doesn't enjoy the unswerving, thoughtless loyalty of all the masses.
И среди рабочих появились подозрения, что ими по-прежнему хотят манипулировать, меняя только тактику, манеру общения.
There were numerous references to that much-revered trinity, the peasants, the workers, and the intelligentsia, but significant concessions too. Other parties would be allowed to organize in workplaces.
Принцип производственного строения КПСС отвечает сложившейся устойчивой традиции, и мы не видим оснований от нее отступать. Кроме того, самим коммунистам принадлежит право определять формы своей организации. Это, разумеется, в полной мере относится и к членам других партий.
If traditionalists were unsettled by this talk, he had reassurance for them. There was no question of the party giving up its unique role where it really matters, in the KGB, the army and the legal system.
Сейчас довольно ставится и другой вопрос, остро причем. Вопрос о деполитизации органов государственного управления, суда, прокуратуры, других правоохранительных органов, а также армии. Наша позиция на этот счет определяется тем, что право на объединение относится к числу неотъемлемых политических свобод.
How, one wonders, does this preservation of a politicized security system square with Mr. Gorbachev's professed belief in a multi-party system? But here that came again. The old identification of the party with the state would come to an end.
Надо исходить из того, что партия не вмешивается в функции советских органов. Это означает, что она не несет ответственности за те решения, которые принимаются без консультаций с ней и оставляют за собой право на их публичную критику.
When an economy is on its knees, there are obvious benefits in washing your hands of responsibility for running the great industries. That much must have appealed to sensible centrists, as much to the radicals who want the communists to become just another party. But then, towards the end, we were back to orthodox Leninism. There would be no place in the party for organized factions or splinter groups.
С этим связан и другой принципиальный вопрос о фракции. Сейчас в развитии демократии, внутрипартийной гласности, открытости мы сделали огромный шаг. Осуждены всякие попытки подавить инакомыслие. Но есть порог, приступить который значило бы подкосить партию. Это создание фракций со своей особой внутренней дисциплиной. Дал мощный импульс теоретическим поискам.
This was as clear a warning as he could have delivered to the radicals in the Democratic platform, and may show that he's prepared to see them leave the party. There are about 150 of them at the Congress, with 1,000 or so less committed sympathizers. To judge from the distinctly lukewarm applause, Mr. Gorbachev may not be able to be all things to all delegates for much longer.
He is trying somehow to bring these two extremities together. So I take this report not as a bright speech, not as a promising speech. It was not intended to be anything like that. What is intended to be as a preparation of ground on which other people should step into and speak and suggest what they can.
Gorbachev still tried to collect together people who are fighting against him and people who support him. It's impossible. Party is splitted, society is splitted. And I think today Gorbachev said such a fine dream speech. He really believes that it's possible to be together being divided. I think we must recognize the reality, and we must recognize that we have more than one party in one.
This evening, as one Politburo member after another tried to defend their individual actions, Mr. Gorbachev's main advisor made an appeal for unity.
Пора кончать гражданскую войну, из которой мы никак не можем выйти. Для партии самое время брать инициативу и в нравственном очищении бытия и сознания.
After that, all eyes were on Boris Yeltsin, the man who's done more than most to separate party from state. Gorbachev had held his ground, dared Yeltsin and his radicals to do their worst and leave. The new president of the Russian Federation needed time to reflect.
Do you think that the bureaucracy will respond to what President Gorbachev said today?
Why did Mikhail Gorbachev embark on this epic voyage of perestroika, reducing his nation from a superpower to one that's begging for Western aid? Well, the answer in short is the economy. It's a shambles. It's incapable of producing the basic goods that people want. Internationally, the ruble is virtually worthless. And domestically, this is as good a currency as any other. Well, in a moment, I'll be talking to the Deputy Prime Minister charged with sorting out this mess. But first, to try to discover what it's like for the ordinary Soviet consumer, I went shopping with a Moscow housewife. On Saturday afternoon, Larissa Remenik had to buy an exercise book for her daughter. Inside Moscow's Hamleys, there was, miracle of miracles, no queue, just the usual scrum at the stationery counter. Cost of the exercise book, 2 rubles. By Soviet standards, Larissa Remenik is well off. She earns 300 rubles a month, about £18 a month at the semi-official exchange rate. It's enough to afford the basic necessities, assuming you can find the basic necessities.
There's just an economic crisis that is now on in this country. And there's tremendous reductions in all sorts of production, including the foodstuffs, because they lose probably up to 50% of what they collect as a harvest. So the accumulated result of this is the emptiness of the shops.
But not all shops. This is Moscow's Harrods, where your flexible friend can buy you the moon. Russians are turned back at the door, but we took Larissa Remenik there. It's no better stock than the average small supermarket in Rotherham, but it seems like Aladdin's cave. You ever see things like kiwi fruits or pineapples and things?
No,
avocados?
No, not in this country, no. Because, we have problems.
Do you feel deprived by not having them?
In a way, yes, not myself, but my kid is deprived, which is worse. Because I would like to make her happy with all of this, but it's not available for me. Any Soviet woman, Soviet housewife would be astonished and also depressed, quite obviously. Because it's so different from her routine life, from what she can get from her next of corner store. So it's a striking view for us, yes, it is. Very few people have legal access to hard currencies in this country. So the shops like this are mostly oriented for foreign visitors, for tourists, for whatever.
And do people resent that?
Oh, sure. It's very, very humiliating in a way to see this contrast between what people can get for real money and what they are trying to get for this paper, which is called ruble. So obviously it is, yes. It's a very, very sad story.
The reason Russia doesn't work is that so many Russians don't want to work. You pretend to pay us, we pretend to work is the old joke. Mr. Gorbachev plans to try to restore some enterprise and initiative by introducing what he calls a regulated market economy. Today he said his government had been too slow in going about it, although he also said that the food price rises, which are an essential first step, had been a mistake. Absurd was the word he used. Well, the man who has to try to sort out this mess is the Deputy Prime Minister, Leonid Abalkin. I went to see him in the Kremlin, and I began by asking him why he becomes so attached to a term more closely and more usually associated with Margaret Thatcher.
Рынок – это продукт человеческой культуры. Лучшее, что в экономике было создано за многие века.
So when you talk about a regulated market economy, what is the model?
Наш рынок ближе, может быть, к европейской модели, а в европейской модели ближе к социал-демократическим вариантам организации рыночных структур, которые есть в Австрии, во Франции, в значительной степени, в ФРГ. Свобода предпринимательства, рыночный механизм ценообразования, возможность приобретения капитала в виде акций в неограниченном количестве, получения дивиденда на них. Это все предусмотрено нашей программой.
In the end, what will decide the prices of goods? Will the government decide it or will the market decide it?
Рынок за некоторым исключением. Например, если мы предполагаем сохранение в нашей системе государственной системы железных дорог или, например, государственных электроэнергетических сетей, которые будут у нас, по типу, скажем, той же самой Франции, сохраняться в государственной собственности. Здесь нет рынка. Здесь есть абсолютная монополия. Потому что имеется один производитель, миллион потребителей, но нет конкуренции.
These are amazing things for a man of your background to be saying, but don't they amount to a betrayal of the revolution?
Я, помимо всего прочего, причисляю себя к категории ученых. А в науке есть только один Бог. Это истина. И человек, который хочет встать на путь науки, он должен поклясться, говорить правду, только правды и ничего, кроме правды. В науке нет ничего другого. И если жизнь изменилась, если исторический опыт показал ошибочность одних путей и правильность других, то чтобы оставаться и честным человеком, и настоящим ученым, надо посмотреть правде в глаза и назвать эту правду своим именем.
But if you have this belief, wouldn't it be better to go the quick route and get the agony over quickly, like Poland?
В Польше существует мелкое частное хозяйство, в сельском хозяйстве все время. Оно более приспособлено к быстрым переменам на рынке. У нас этого нет, у нас другие структуры. В Польше существует общественное согласие и полная поддержка правительственной программы, за которую выступает 80-90% населения. У нас правительство должно осуществлять эту программу, имея поддержку значительно меньшего числа людей. В Польше есть костел, который формирует всю идеологию. У нас этого идеологического инструмента нет.
Everywhere I go in this city, I see people queuing for bread, for other kinds of food, for vegetables, for drugs, for almost anything. How much longer are people going to wait for you to work your miracle?
Ну, те, кто часто бывал в нашей стране, знают, что очередь — это и время проведения в очереди стало национальной традицией. Стоя в очереди, люди не только ругаются, они обсуждают последние политические новости. Это позор, конечно, для страны и позор для социальной системы. И вот мы просто хотим объяснить людям, что если мы перейдем к рынку, и тогда, когда перейдем к рынку, то не будет очередей, не будет спекулянтов, не будет вот этих закрытых распределителей, где здесь продают для партийного аппарата, здесь для ветеранов войны, здесь для многодетных семей, а каждый может прийти в магазин и без очереди все купить. Вот мы это и обещаем людям. Весь вопрос ведь очень простой.
Hearing a deputy prime minister of the Soviet Union talking in such glowing terms about the saving grace of the market economy would have had the founding father of the revolution, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, spinning in his grave. Mr. Gorbachev's speech today contained a couple of obligatory references to Lenin, but they were fewer and less enthusiastic than most of his predecessors would have chosen. As Mark Urban now reports, it's symptomatic of the way in which Lenin's reputation is beginning to be re-evaluated.
The changing of the guard at the tomb of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. For more than 60 years, the mausoleum containing the embalmed body of Soviet Russia's first leader has been the nearest the communist world had to a holy shrine. His writings were scoured for endorsement by conservatives and reformers alike. Preservation of his memory was, in a curiously Soviet way, above politics. For decades, Soviet leaders found their inspiration in Lenin. All their problems could be blamed on lesser communists. Stalin and Brezhnev have now been disgraced by Mr. Gorbachev. But even after 5 years of his reforming policies, attacking Lenin himself remains a taboo. Now even that is being broken.
He was a fanatic,
жестокий,
a cruel, bloodthirsty man who didn't care for the good of our nation and whose only aim was to bring to power his own men. That's why he managed to destroy our state, the Russian Empire. And that's why Lenin's followers were unable to create anything good on its ruins.
That assessment is increasingly popular among intellectuals in Moscow. But ordinary Russians visiting the capital still come to the mausoleum. Few of them appear ready to back the radicals who think Lenin's body should be buried and the mausoleum pulled down.
I think our children must have some ideals in their life. For instance, we were brought up with Lenin, therefore our children should be brought up with Lenin too.
There should be something left of the revolution. Let it be Lenin at least.
Even the staff at Moscow's Brain Institute were drawn into the cult of Lenin. They've spent years taking apart the brains of leading Soviet citizens. In Lenin's case, they tried to find out what had made him such an outstanding communist.
I think that we have now calculated these results with a special morphometric methods. I think this after 1 or maybe 1.5 year, we have some quantitative results.
And what have you discovered?
Lenin's brain had very big neurons in the third layer in the cortex, especially in the frontal lobe, which is connected with a high intellectual structure.
Vladimir Solukin has emerged as one of the most outspoken critics of Lenin. He remains a party member but wants images of Lenin banished from public places.
Since they have started taking away Lenin monuments in Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, even in Georgia, the time will come when our people will awake having understood the truth and will remove Lenin monuments too.
But at Moscow's city council, the removals have already started. The bust which used to stand in its chamber was moved into the corridor 4 days ago. The vote taken here to throw it out could now be repeated across Russia. But even the most reform-minded city deputies don't feel the time is yet right to demolish Lenin's mausoleum. That, they say, could incite hardline Leninists to violence. Despite the setbacks, many party members still believe in Lenin.
Now, unfortunately, it has become fashionable to side with proprietors, with the rich, with those who got rather doubtful sources of income and make profit not working for it. I think that such trend is not good for our society at all. To side with the masses of honest working people, that is what means to remain a Marxist-Leninist.
The Victory Factory in Moscow turns out 7 million Lenin badges every year. Among its most successful designs, Baby Lenin. Millions of school children have grown up with it pinned to them. But change is being felt here too. Several months ago, they started making crucifixes. Orders for Lenin are in decline. Production of Lenin badges is down this year here, and people expect it to fall still further. Lenin's value as a political icon is in sharp decline. Now, here and elsewhere, Russian heroes of an older kind are being revived.
This is an icon of Our Lady. It's not a novelty. Some factories have been producing crucifixes and icons for a long time. But now they can't cope with the constantly growing demand for such items. So we too started producing these things.
Lenin may still be valued by many Russians for his ideas, but his days as the visible god of communism seem to be coming to an end.
Mark Urban reporting. Well, over the next 10 days, we shall see whether Mr. Gorbachev has been successful in his attempt to hold the party together. We'll be here again tomorrow night, but for the moment, back to you in London, Donald.
Thank you, Jeremy. And back here in a few minutes, the battle for the soul of the Anglican Church. We assess the strength of the Evangelical faction in the contest to select a new Archbishop of Canterbury. But first, some of today's other main news stories. Imelda Marcos, the widow of the deposed president of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos, has been cleared of charges of racketeering and fraud. The trial began in March and the jury took 5 days to reach their decision. In New York tonight, some jurors have criticized the evidence put forward by the government. We thought they did a terrible, terrible job, said one. Be that as it may, there was no disguising the delight of the loyal band of Marcos supporters who were waiting for today's verdict. Mrs. Marcos, who is 61 today, sobbed with joy after a jury in Manhattan said she had not conspired with her husband to buy art, jewelry and real estate with $200 million stolen from their country.
The only thing that I wanted for my birthday. Thank you so much.
The trial has been unusual even by American standards. Mrs. Marcos's lawyer, Jerry Spence, may have resembled a cowboy, but his decision to call no defence witnesses clearly paid off. His client was, he admitted, a world-class shopper, but she was also a world-class decent human being. Her only crime, he argued, was loving her husband for 35 years. The prosecution called 95 witnesses in all, some of whom described Mrs. Marcos's spending binges at Bloomingdale's and elsewhere. The New York branch of the Philippine National Bank, it was alleged, became her personal piggy bank. The prosecution conceded that much of the evidence was circumstantial, but claimed that as a cabinet minister and mayor of Manila, Mrs. Marcos must have known of her husband's financial dealings. Acquitted along with her was the Saudi businessman Adnan Khashoggi, who also played an entrepreneurial role in the Iran-Contra affair. The jury decided he was not guilty of helping Mrs. Marcos to conceal ownership of property.
I haven't doubted it because I had confidence in the justice system here. But I would have been surprised if it was the other way around.
Mrs. Marcos clearly found the trial an ordeal, 3 times succumbing to stress-related ailments. Today, the judge ordered a doctor to attend in case she should be overcome when the verdict was delivered. In the event, his services were not required. The Deputy President of the ANC, Nelson Mandela, has tonight attempted to defuse the row over his remarks about the IRA. At a news conference in Dublin this morning, he had said that the British government should talk to the IRA without preconditions. The comment attracted a barrage of criticism from the 3 main parties in Britain. And before leaving for London tonight, Mr. Mandela said he was saddened to have been dragged into the controversy. He repeated his view that the violence should stop, but said he would not prescribe to anyone how it should be achieved. The father of one of the victims of the Lockerbie disaster has been meeting the Transport Secretary Cecil Parkinson tonight to explain how he took a fake bomb onto a British Airways flight. Dr. Jim Swire said he did it to draw attention to lax security at Heathrow Airport, adding that he's prepared to go to jail if necessary to make his point. Mr. Parkinson has said that he is not taking this matter lightly.
I think we'd better wait until my officials have the full facts, and as I said, Dr. Swire's cooperating, Mr. Flick cooperating very fully and happily, and they will be investigating what he tells them tomorrow, first thing as a matter of urgency, and when I have anything more to say, you'll be the first to hear it.
Dr. Swire said it had been a constructive meeting.
I would say that it was a politically mature meeting in the sense that no hasty commitment was made. What difference it will make to our demand for an independent inquiry, we shall have to wait and see. And I think the response to it depends, if I may say so, very much on public opinion.
10 people have been injured in an IRA rocket attack on a police station in Belfast. 5 policemen, 3 soldiers and 2 civilians were hurt, but none of them seriously. Soon after the attack at Grosvenor Road RUC station, police arrested 2 men and recovered an RPG-7 rocket launcher and a rifle. President Bush has said that NATO leaders meeting in London this week will make significant changes in nuclear weapons policy. He said he expected unanimous agreement on a new course for the alliance. According to NATO sources, Mr. Bush has proposed making nuclear arms weapons of last resort, thus moving away from the present doctrine of flexible response. The president of Liberia, Samuel Doe, was under siege tonight after rebels surrounded the capital Monrovia and cut all telephone links with the city. The rebel leader, Charles Taylor, has called on the president to resign to avoid a bloody battle for Monrovia. Swindon Town Football Club has been partly successful in its appeal against demotion to the 3rd Division. An FA Commission meeting in London today decided instead to put Swindon down to the 2nd Division. The club had admitted making illegal payments to players.
We have to start again in the 2nd Division, and we are going to prove in the next season that we are able to do it all over again.
Are you hopeful that you will be able to retain most of your players?
I can't see why it is and why not.
So you're planning to stay at Swindon?
Yes.
The Dutch-based electronics group Philips says it'll have to shed 10,000 jobs worldwide. Most of the cuts will be in Europe. At a shareholders meeting in Eindhoven today, the company predicted an annual loss this year of more than £600 million. And a look at the markets. In London, the 100 share index closed at 23.72, down 2 points. On Wall Street, the Dow Jones closed at 28.99, up 18. On the foreign exchanges, the pound did well against the weak dollar, gaining 2.5 cents to close at 177.45. At long last, the process is underway to select a new Archbishop of Canterbury to succeed Robert Runcie. The bishops have now chosen their representatives on the Appointments Commission, but since the whole thing is supposed to be very hush-hush, we probably won't hear much more about it until a name appears like a rabbit from a hat sometime in the autumn. But what kind of organisation will the next Archbishop inherit? The Church of England presents a placid, imperturbable surface, but what's going on underneath? Anthony Howard has been inspecting the anatomy of Anglicanism and has discovered that today's Church of God moves not so much like a mighty army, but more like a replica political party, complete with its own militant tendency.
The Church of England in all its majesty. The annual festival of the Corporation of the Sons of the Clergy. Held each year in St. Paul's Cathedral, it's a piece of traditional Anglican pageantry going back over 300 years. But it was change rather than continuity that on this occasion was in the air. It was Dr. Runcie's last year as Archbishop. And the Bishop of London will soon follow him into retirement. That changing of the guard at the top coincides with a dramatic upsurge in old-time evangelical biblical religion. In what an Anglican bishop once unkindly called the Protestant underworld, something is stirring.
There has undoubtedly been a very considerable growth in the influence of the evangelical wing. I hate the word party, but we know what we're talking about within the church. And rightly so, I think. Some of our best leaders are from that wing of the church.
I don't dispute that the evangelicals, through proclaiming a very simple in many ways and very certain gospel, are gaining a great deal of ground. And I don't resent that either, because I think there are stages in faith when we all need simple things to hold on to.
All Souls Langham Place is the leading evangelical church in London, and possibly the best attended Anglican place of worship in the entire country. It's packed to the doors morning and evening every Sunday, and appears to have a notably cosmopolitan appeal, especially for young people. Those who come here tend to have a squeaky clean image, and in no way allow themselves to be troubled by doubt or uncertainty. In a real sense, this church represents a reassuring brazier of simple biblical Christianity at which they can regularly warm their hands. It is, in fact, the emblem and symbol of the evangelical revival, which has been one of the most striking developments within the Church of England over the past 30 years.
Everybody stand up.
The rise of the evangelical movement reaches out into the world of education. The act of worship in school never used to be like this. This fee-paying evangelical school in Romford, Essex, non-denominational, has doubled in size since its foundation in 1980.
Hallelujah, praise the Lord. Hallelujah, praise the Lord. Hallelujah, praise the Lord.
When we first started our school back in 1980, we felt we wanted to run a school with a distinctly Christian philosophy. And that Christian philosophy runs through all aspects of the school life, and we aim to have a curriculum which is based on Christian principles.
The enthusiasm and fervour with which children such as these are taught to regard religion could one day threaten the whole reticent, traditional nature of the Anglican Church. Lord Coggan maintains that the great historical tide of Anglicanism is broad enough to embrace even unorthodox developments like these.
I am no great man for dancing in the pews, but I must have a religion which not only meets my intellectual needs, but also my moral and my emotional ones. And I think Anglicanism is seen at its best when it gives a proper balance to all those inputs.
An elder statesman's overview from the last Archbishop of Canterbury, but it may be that it disregards recent developments on the ground. Church House, Westminster, is the home of the Church of England's own Parliament, the General Synod. When it comes to elections involving laity as well as clergy, evangelicals tend nowadays to win them.
We usually get a very considerable...
Preparations for the next synod, to be held at York this month, are already underway in Church House. It will be the last meeting of a synod which even its General Secretary, Sir Derek Pattinson, admits has been dominated by the evangelicals.
The evangelical presence, particularly among the laity, increased very dramatically in the last election in 1985. That election was fought, if you remember, under the shadow of Bishop David Jenkins's contributions to discussion. Now, I think at the moment, any neutral observer, as I am, would say that certainly the evangelical voice in the Synod is very strong.
And it promises to be even stronger as a result of the new Synod elections. But while the evangelicals have been sweeping forward within the Church, their views have struck a political spark too. The House of Commons has become an echo chamber for the C of E's discontents.
The Church hopes to fill the churches by somehow meeting people halfway and by not being tough on sin and also being rather like a branch of the DHSS. Well, that isn't the role of the Church in this world at all. The people would love to see a smack of firm government. They'd love to see strong leadership, clear, definite leadership. They want a moral lead too. We read these awful statistics about marriage and illegitimate children. Soon half the nation will be illegitimate. Surely they must talk about that, and not just about South Africa and the bomb or the community charge.
Dr. John Hapgood, the Archbishop of York, is the man the Tories have got it in for. He's the candidate they least want to see succeeding Dr. Runcie. To those nostalgic for the old simplicities, he continues to hold out no sort of olive branch.
It seems to me that during the past decade we've been living in a period of unprecedented change, and that very often in that kind of circumstance people look to the Church to provide a stability, a certainty, which in many aspects the Church has not been willing to provide.
But there is surely a demand both in the lay world and within the Church itself for saying, look, what we want is firm, unequivocal answers, and they perhaps point to somebody like the Chief Rabbi and say, if he can do it, why can't the Church of England do it?
I realise that there are many people who do want very firm, unequivocal answers to questions which may not admit of such answers. And it does seem to me a question of honesty, that the quest for absolute certainty in things which are not actually certain seems to be one that has to be denied, even if it makes one unpopular.
Unpopular the Church of England has certainly been these last 10 years with the Conservative government. And there are those who think that the impending vacancy at Canterbury will give the Prime Minister her chance of taking her revenge upon it. In the selection of the new Archbishop, the Prime Minister gets 2 bites at the cherry. Not only does she choose one name out of 2, finally to forward to the Queen, she also appoints the chairman of the selection panel that does the preliminary trawl. When Lord Caldicott, a loyal Conservative and a leading evangelical, was chosen to preside over what is known as the Crown Appointments Commission some 2 months ago, there was a certain fluttering in the ecclesiastical dovecots.
Lord Caldicott is certainly a party political man, and he's lent his patronage to ecclesiastical party political organisations, though to my knowledge he hasn't actually taken part in ecclesiastical politics. From what I know of him, he seems to be a fair person, but eyebrows have been raised. There has been talk because his family are a staunchly evangelical family. The Inskips, his father, Thomas Inskip, after all, was one of those who kiboshed the Church's 1928 prayer book on the grounds that it prayed for the dead and so on.
This summer's Mammoth Christian Resources exhibition, improbably sited on a Surrey racecourse, had Bishop Montefiore as one of its visitors. It was no doubt bad luck that his beady eye should fall on one of the leaflets that was on display.
One of these was from an organisation called the Spirit of '88, which was a a virulently anti-ecumenical organisation, very Protestant, very, very anti-Roman. And to my amazement, I found Lord Caldecott was one of the patrons of this. Whether he hadn't read the fine print or whether he really means to be a patron is another matter, but it did raise questions in my mind as to whether he could combine that patronage with being chairman of the Crown Appointments Commission.
But so long as the Church of England remains what its title suggests, there can be clearly no objection to the state exercising its responsibility over it. It was founded, after all, by Henry VIII to be the national church, and in that sense it belongs to the nation as much as to its own active members. But does it belong to the Prime Minister? That perhaps is the most delicate question of all. Is it possible that the Evangelicals may yet find their most powerful supporter right in the heart of number 10?
Well, I haven't got a window into the Prime Minister's more intimate convictions, but certainly she has friends and advisors in that area, and temperamentally one can see that there might be some kind of link there, insofar as she does like definite opinions, and she's a strong fighter.
Here in Westminster, where the secular and spiritual worlds meet, it seems pretty clear that there has come about an identity of outlook, even a community of interest, between an ecclesiastical party in the church and a political party in the state. Like Mrs. Thatcher, evangelicals believe in basic, simple truth, and they share with her a common language of confidence and certainty. If she's a conviction politician, then they equally can claim to be conviction Christians. Only perhaps when the name of the next Archbishop of Canterbury is announced will we know whether the same simple melody will in future command the common allegiance of the Church as well as of the state.
And further to that report, on Wednesday, the present Archbishop of Canterbury, in his first television interview since he announced his retirement, will be talking to Anthony Howard about his hopes for the future of the Church of England. And now a look at some of tomorrow morning's front pages. Gorbachev's fighting defence of perestroika, threat of dark times ahead, leads the Times. Mandela criticised over call for IRA talks. Gorbachev holds off party right. The Guardian defends reforms at party congress. The Financial Times, back me or face a dark future, is the Daily Telegraph's version of that. Marcos and Khashoggi cleared in New York of racketeering and fraud. No alternative to perestroika. The Morning Star. Mandela suggests talks with IRA. Mr. Mandela has attempted to tone down these remarks, of course, this evening. Fergie security scandal, new home guarded by one part-timer only. The Mirror. My New Love by Andrew Lloyd Webber leads today. Frida Melda keeps hold of £9 billion. Andrew's new love is the Sun's lead. Well, that's all from Newsnight for tonight. Tomorrow I'll be interviewing Nelson Mandela and asking him how he can keep up the pressure for an end to apartheid in South Africa without provoking at the same time a white backlash. Well, that's tomorrow at 10:30. But for now, from all of us on the programme in London and in Moscow, a very good night to you.